In last week's video, I took two of horror gaming's most iconic protagonists, Isaac Clarke and Leon Kennedy, and put them head to head in a 1v1 to see who was most likely to come out on top. And since you guys seem to really like that video, I figured I'd follow it up with a part 2. So we'll be talking about what if Leon and Isaac swapped positions. So we'll be putting Leon on the Ishimura in Dead Space 1, and Isaac in the Village in Resident Evil 4. And as always, before we get too deep into the video, if you guys end up enjoying this one, make sure to leave a like and sub to the channel. It really helps me out in the algorithm. And if you do like this video, make sure you go check out part 1 that I released last week. But with all that intro stuff out of the way, since I started off with Isaac in the last video, let's start with Leon.
Sounds more like an alien invasion if you ask me.
So for both characters, I'm going to go over multiple situations and circumstances to see how likely it is for them to survive. Scenario A for Leon is that he's teleported to the Ishimura via whatever means you want to make up. Maybe he arrives on the Kellion with everyone else. Maybe he's just teleported there for some reason. It doesn't really matter how they get there too much, but what does matter is what Leon has on him when he gets to the Ishimura. So for this scenario, I'll be talking about if Leon brought all of his equipment from RE4, and that's what he has through the entire scenario. So Leon will have access to things like the Matilda, TMP, sniper rifle, RPG, bulletproof vest, combat knife, all that stuff. And also for the sake of brevity, let's just assume that he has either infinite ammo or that for some reason there's ammo for these weapons on the Ishimura, because obviously if these characters run out of ammo and don't really have a way to defend themselves, that's kind of boring and not very fun to talk about. And of course Leon isn't an engineer, he's not here to fix the Ishimura, he's here to get off of it. So what's most likely to happen is that Leon is probably going to want to search for the escape pods. So right off the bat, we kind of have to be a little bit charitable with Leon, because for those who are unaware, the marker in the Dead Space universe tends to drive a vast majority of people insane, and it's very vague on why certain characters have a resistance to this. Isaac, for example, has this, Ellie, and a couple others. It's very rare. The only explanation that's really ever been given is that you have to be of a certain intelligence level.
You know what a marker is?
Yeah. The unitologist on my crew wouldn't shut up about it. Why? Is it real?
Yeah, it's real. Tiedemann made one using codes, patterns stored in our heads, mine and Strauss. Everything that's happening on this station is happening because of that marker. I have to get to it and destroy it, and I need Strauss to tell me how.
In order to resist the marker's effects and not go completely insane, but obviously that's a very vague statement, there's no way to really measure that. The marker is able to drive plenty of intelligent people insane, doctors, scientists, etc. And while Leon definitely isn't stupid or dumb by any stretch of the imagination, it's kind of hard to make an argument that he would have resistance to the marker's effects on the same level as like Isaac. But obviously if I just sit here and say, well, Leon doesn't do anything, he goes insane and then blows his brains out, that's pretty boring, not very fun to talk about. So we're just going to say that yes, Leon does have a level of resistance to the marker's effects, so that maybe he does see hallucinations and stuff, but he's not going to go completely insane. One problem that Leon is very likely to face is the fact that by the time of Dead Space 1, the Ishimura is already very heavily damaged. There are multiple parts of the ship that are completely exposed to the vacuum of space. So if Leon were to walk out of the wrong door, he could easily be decompressed out into the vacuum of space and just instantly die. There's also multiple zero-G areas as well, so I'm not sure how Leon would handle fighting or traversing those areas. But even despite all of those problems, his biggest issue is definitely going to be fighting the necromorphs themselves. Necromorphs are very resistant to headshots and body shots. In fact, headshots only serve to make them more unpredictable and aggressive. We see on multiple occasions that trained military soldiers with ballistic rifles get absolutely decimated by even a handful of necromorphs. In Dead Space 1, an entire squad of military personnel are completely taken out by what was essentially just a single necromorph that they let loose in an escape pod. And in Dead Space 2, we see 200 armed military personnel, all with pulse rifles and riot shields, get absolutely decimated by a group of necromorphs as well. For those unfamiliar with Dead Space and necromorphs as a whole, unlike BOWs in Resident Evil where your main objective is to go for headshots usually, necromorphs are already dead, so shooting them in the head does absolutely nothing. The only way you can take them out is by removing all of their limbs so they just can't move.
Isaac, don't bother shooting those fuckers in the head. Doesn't even slow them down.
Okay. The only way is hacking them apart. Those arms, their legs.
Does that even kill them? Or do they just stop moving?
And it's for this reason that I actually think Leon's military background and training, as well as his experience fighting BOWs, might actually hurt him more than help him. Because he's likely going to assume that necromorphs are some version of the T-Virus or Umbrella BOW, and his training and instincts are going to tell him to go for headshots and body shots, which is going to do nothing but make his job even harder. And even if he survives long enough to learn to shoot for the limbs, most of the weapons that he has access to don't really have the firepower to blow limbs off like most of Isaac's weaponry does. And many of the weapons that arguably do have that level of power, like the sniper rifle for example, are semi-auto and very low rate of fire, so when you're being swarmed by a group of necromorphs that are all extremely fast, it's going to be very hard to target their limbs while they're moving, and also having to deal with multiple targets at the same time. I mean, it's not going to be as simple as just headshotting one and then moving on to the other. You're going to have to blow all 4 limbs off for every single necromorph that he's fighting. And unlike most of the Ganados or zombies, the necromorphs are extremely fast. Now, if we give Leon the infinite ammo RPG, that should more than likely take out pretty much any threat that's on the Ishimura. However, there is a chance that he could blow the hull of the Ishimura open and decompress himself out into space. But assuming he doesn't do that, I think with the infinite ammo RPG, he has a very high likelihood of making it to the escape pods and getting off the Ishimura. With that being said though, one thing you have to take into account with necromorphs is that unlike many of the BOWs in Resident Evil, especially like T-Virus zombies, is that necromorphs are very intelligent because they're being controlled by the hive mind. Even more intelligent BOWs like the Ganados for example, which work in a very similar way to the necromorphs where they're telepathically controlled and given commands by Sadler, they're not exactly the brightest. Whereas in Dead Space, all necromorphs use ambush and stalking tactics. A slasher will jump out in front of you just to draw your attention to him, specifically to give another necromorph the opportunity to sneak up behind you. They also stalk and follow their prey all around the Ishimura, waiting for the most opportune time to attack them. And they've even been shown on multiple occasions doing things like cutting power to areas, destroying or launching escape pods, destroying the gravity core of the Kellions so that they can't get away. I mean, there's a real chance that if the necromorphs know that Leon is trying to get to an escape pod, that they get there first and they just launch all of them before he can reach them. One thing to really keep in mind is that Leon lost to Mendez like twice in a row, and Mendez isn't particularly fast, and while he is pretty strong, I would say his level of strength is either weaker or similar to something like a Brute, for example. And because of the Brute's armor, he's going to be pretty much resistant to all of Leon's weapons except for maybe the RPG. And if Leon gets grabbed by a Brute, like he did twice in a row by Mendez, it's just game over right there. He's going to get ripped apart. It's extremely difficult to make an argument that Leon wins in this situation unless we give him the infinite ammo RPG, and even then it's kind of debatable. There's just way too many things going against him, and most of the aspects that make Leon so strong in his universe, like his combat training and his experience fighting BOWs, actively work against him here. Now I want to go over scenario B, where Leon, let's say, finds an engineering suit and the plasma cutter, for example, and let's just say that he learns how to use them on the fly. Does he survive then? Now, while I will do a similar scenario for Isaac as well, I'm not going to spend too much time on these scenarios because they're basically just turning the character into the other, which kind of defeats the purpose of trying to see how they would do in each other's situations, and I just don't find it as interesting. With that being said though, I think if you do give him kinesis, stasis, the plasma cutter, and the engineering suit, it greatly increases his chance of survival, and not only will he not have to worry about being blown out into space and suffocating, but he'll have increased durability and his weapons will be far more effective against the necromorphs. So in this situation, I think it is extremely likely that Leon survives. That's pretty much all I have to say for the Leon portion, so let's go ahead and talk about Isaac.
Are you ready?
hurt, isn't it?
Yes.
So for Isaac's scenario A, let's just say he time traveled or was teleported to the Resident Evil universe some way, somehow. Like I said, it doesn't really matter too much how they get there. And for whatever reason, Isaac was also tasked with saving the president's daughter. So of course he was sent to the village in Resident Evil 4. So just like we did with Leon, we'll be talking about how he would do with all of his equipment. So he has his suit and he has his entire arsenal of weapons. And just like for Leon, just assume he either has infinite ammo or for some reason there's plasma cutter ammo and all of that stuff scattered throughout the village. When it comes to Isaac fighting BOWs, he's actually at an insane advantage. Because if he assumes that there's some form of necromorphs, just like we talked about how if Leon assumed necromorphs were a form of BOW, he's probably going to instinctively try to dismember them, which will absolutely work. In fact, it would be even easier than fighting necromorphs because necromorphs are a lot stronger and faster on average than Ganados. Ganados are, for the most part, very slow moving, very shambly. If Isaac learns that he can just do headshots to instantly take these guys out without dismembering them, it's going to make fighting the BOWs and Ganados an absolute cakewalk. Especially with weapons like the plasma cutter, which fire ionized plasma that burns at around 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around the same degrees as the surface of the sun. One plasma cutter blast is going to pretty much kill anything in Isaac's way for the most part. And even if it doesn't, he still has things like the line gun, the force gun, or the contact beam. And if he was dealing with a group of Ganados, the pulse rifle would easily rip them to shreds. Really trying to put it into perspective here, every single BOW and monster in RE4, including the bosses, which are the strongest enemies in the game, die in a single hit to a RPG. So a couple plasma cutter shots at maximum and they're cooked. And I know we're giving Isaac like infinite ammo or just saying that he can find ammo around like we did with Leon, but even if he ran out of ammo, he has Kinesis, and Kinesis being used to move 1,000-pound construction equipment, it could easily rip any Ganado or BOW apart, and he can spam it. It has no recharge, it has no ammo limit. So even if he ran out of ammo, Stasis and Kinesis just completely solo RE4. And speaking of Stasis, if he uses that on literally any enemy, they're immediately GG'd right there. For those unfamiliar with Dead Space, Stasis is an ability that Isaac has where he can shoot a projectile that slows time for anything it hits, basically making them a sitting target. His suit also of course gives him protection from pretty much any form of hazard or attack you could think of, whether it's from blades or guns. Now some of you guys might be thinking that Isaac doesn't have a ton of experience fighting normal humans that use weapons and guns and stuff like that, but he actually does, and in fact he's able to take out squads of military trained militiamen pretty easily. So I don't think Ganados having crossbows or tomahawks or anything like that is going to give him any real trouble. Any puzzle that Isaac comes across would also likely be extremely easy for him to solve. I mean, he's not only an engineer, but his intelligence is hyped up throughout all of the games. He's always talked about as being a genius. So if Leon could figure out these puzzles, it's going to be even easier for Isaac to do so. Now, if we take away Isaac's suit, Kinesis, Stasis, and all of his weapons, and we give him Leon's equipment, things get a lot more debatable. However, I think what I have to say on this next scenario is going to surprise a lot of you. Now, Isaac would likely be able to use a lot of these firearms that Leon has. I mean, he's able to use the Seeker Rifle and Pulse Rifle, which are both ballistic firearm weapons, and the only real difference that they have between modern weapons that we have now or that Leon uses is the fact that they look kind of strange and they have some weird reloads. But even if Isaac didn't know how to use them immediately, I'm sure he could figure it out extremely quickly. So I'm going to assume that Isaac has less durability than Leon when he doesn't have his suit. And if that's the case, I mean, a couple hits from Mendez or some of these super powered BOWs are probably going to take him out. He's also not nearly as agile as Leon either, so him dodging a lot of these attacks, he might not be able to pull it off. However, with all of that being said, Isaac is used to fighting groups of enemies that are way faster and stronger than him anyway. And the Ganados are still easier to take out than a Necromorph since you don't have to dismember them, he could just headshot them. So I actually think that Isaac has a pretty damn solid chance of surviving the situation. And of course, if we give Isaac the infinite ammo RPG, then of course yes, he wins. And yeah, that's how I think it would go down. It's kind of interesting how in this video the Leon section was a lot longer than Isaac's, even though it was the reverse in the last video. I also want to give a quick thank you to all of you guys who watched and subscribed off of the last video. I wasn't really expecting that video to pop off like it did, so I'm glad you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys enjoyed this one too. I'll be making plenty more Dead Space content in the future as well, so if you're a Dead Space fan, you're in the right place. And with all that being said, guys, I appreciate you for watching, subbing, liking the video, all that stuff, and I'll see you guys on the next one.